Hello, everyone, and welcome to YPs and ERGs Workplace. Our program today is a special conversation in partnership with the Austin LGBT Chamber of Commerce. My name is Alex Villa, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's panel. I'm an Austin Young Chamber board member and the Chief Operating Officer for the American Red Cross serving the Central and South Texas region. Today's panel discussion is a conversation with ERG leaders. ERGs, or employee resource groups, are employee-led groups that leverage company strength and talent to drive business and community change. Our panelists will discuss why ERGs are important, how they support important DEI work, and what steps you can take to start or grow one at your workplace. Like I mentioned, this panel is a partnership with the Austin Young Chamber and the Austin LGBT Chamber. The Austin LGBT Chamber, founded in 1997, works to achieve equality and inclusion by promoting economic vitality in our communities and strengthening LGBT and allied businesses. In 2004, the Austin LGBT Chamber became one of the founding members of the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, with representation on the Council of Chambers and Business Organizations. In 2019, Austin LGBT Chamber joined forces with our partner LGBT Chamber in Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio to form the Texas LGBT Chamber. Similar to the LGBT Chamber, the Austin Young Chamber runs many programs throughout the year that promote business and talent development, entrepreneurship, civic engagement, and community growth. Keep an eye on the Austin Young Chamber website and social channels for additional programs, pitch competitions, and topics to support your business. And if you're not a member, consider joining to receive year-round benefits for your business. All right. Today's format will include a 45-minute panel discussion followed by 30 minutes of roundtable networking. As we start the panel, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A tool so that we can answer questions at the end if we have time. And feel free to be active in the chat with fire emojis, clapping, or I'm not sure what a +1 is, but it says a +1 if you're loving what you're hearing. So with that, let's get started and meet our panelists. So first up, we have Cody Eastman. And Cody Eastman, from crafting experiences, fusing his passion for people and technology to establishing and supporting DE&I programming inside and outside his workplaces, Cody Eastman is dedicated to bringing heart work to the forefront of everything he touches. A storyteller, creative, and truly inquisitive soul, he continually pushes boundaries and encourages those around him to dream without limits. Our stories have the power to activate hearts and unlock DE&I, and it's his mission to use these to create change and visibility wherever possible. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cody.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
Next up, we have Michael Luna. Michael is the Central Texas Merchandising Manager for the selling departments at HEB. He has worked at HEB for 13 years and has been part of the HEB's Diversity Council for 6 years. Michael now leads the newly formed Pride Resource Group for employees in the Central Texas area. In his spare time, Michael enjoys running distances, hiking, and spending time with his 2 husky mixes. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
Thank you. Next up, we have Vincent Ramirez. Vincent was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, and started working for Amazon a little over 2 years ago. Vincent is more proud than ever to be part of the LGBTQ+ community and was recently selected to serve on the global board for Amazon LGBTQ+ Affinity Group, Glamazon, as a member of the member engagement lead. Welcome, Vincent.
Thanks, Alex.
And last but not least, we have Nicole Taylor. Nicole Taylor is the Director of Community at Immersion and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion DEI consultant. With over 10 years of community building and DEI experience, Nicole's work includes launching global employee resource groups, producing women-focused personal and professional development programs, serving as Inclusion Committee Chair for General Assembly and an international ed tech company, and City Director of Changemaker Chats, an international nonprofit, and creating scholarship programs for historically marginalized communities. She continuously drives forward meaningful conversations and community building through panel discussions, facilitating town halls, thought leadership, and crafting transparent corporate communications for internal and external audiences. Nicole is the recipient of the Div Inc.'s 2021 Champions of Change People's Choice Award. Welcome, Nicole, and thank you. Quite an impressive graphic you've got there.
I know, it's like, thank you.
I'm fanboying over here. So I want to thank all of our amazing panelists for joining us tonight. As I mentioned, please drop your questions in the Q&A so that way we can get to those as we're seeing them. But let's get started. So we're going to jump into question one, and let's lay some groundwork about each of your backgrounds as it relates to your ERG roles and expertise. So first up, I'll start with Cody. It's incredible that you were the founding member of the LGBTQ plus ERG Open at George P. Johnson. What was the process like, and how was the ERG looking to make an impact at the company?
The process was long and hard. Anybody who started an ERG knows that it's work, but it comes out of hard work, and I think we use that term a lot when you're celebrating humans. It's really getting in there and digging in and understanding where identities and intersections meet and how you celebrate that through storytelling and programming. But really, we were kind of the foundation to start the ERG ecosystem at our company and our agency. It was us and the women that started. And it was really conversations with leadership of, if we're going to do this, we're not going to bullshit with you. We're not going to do this to check boxes. We're going to get into subject matter that is sometimes uncomfortable, especially when it comes to LGBTQIA+. Identity is a messy thing, as we find out daily with coming out story and stuff. So it's been a lot of work, but the mission is really creating education. It's creating moments to be accessible to people who don't understand what the community is. It's accessible to parents. Last year we hosted National Coming Out Day, where we did a parent roundtable to let people understand what it's like to have a child that's coming out. We really kind of are the epicenter of learning and education, but we're really a safe space to land for anyone who wants to know about the queer community.
Awesome, thank you. Michael, you've done a lot of grassroots work and talked with other PRGs about how they've organized initiatives. Can you give us an example of some of the grassroots work and how it's been successful?
Yes, absolutely. So, before our employee resource group, I was a part of our Central Texas Diversity Council, still am. And so we activated on a lot of events throughout the year here in Austin. And we do that, of course, representing the organization. And so one of the events that I led through was the Austin AIDS Walk. And so there was a handful of sponsors there that organized over like 30 people that were a part of the organization, and they were representing their employee resource group. So I started asking around. I'd go to tent to tent and poke around who led through this, who organized this, and how did you go about doing this? So I ended up finding out who the event organizers were, and I was able to take photos and shared my research like with the 6 people at the time that were sprinkled around the organization that were navigating through the creation of our employee resource group. And so that was 2017. And so I would have never imagined that today in 2021 that we would have created our employee resource group. This was what the research that was done was contributing to that. And now we are almost 902 members strong in our groups throughout the organization.
That's incredible. Very impressive. Thank you, Michael. Vincent, you were recently selected to serve on the global board for Amazon's LGBTA plus affinity group, Glamazon. What steps did you take in your own professional development to take on this role? And what are some of your plans as the member engagement lead?
Yeah. So I think in terms of like the professional development piece was really just wanting to be, or just to have the passion initially to be involved. The previous organization that I came from didn't have affinity groups or ERG groups. And so when I was looking for new employment, I think one of the kind of check boxes for myself was to make sure that they had some type of resource groups and that I could be actively involved with. So when I joined Amazon, it was a little over 2 years ago. I immediately joined Glamazon and wanted to be active and involved, but what I soon learned was that in that process, all the different variations that we have in the organization made it a little more challenging to really understand kind of how I could be involved in activities that it could be involved in. And so from a professional development standpoint, what I started to do was just to reach out and start networking with other members and figure out, are we hosting events? What ways can I be active, whether it's through volunteering or through social events? And I started kind of initiating events myself and started becoming involved and roping other members involved into it as well. And so like, for example, in the Austin region, just networking with people that Glamazon members, but maybe are not being connected totally into the Glamazon chapter or to the boards and things of that sort. So as I was able to continue to network and work with everyone, I felt that I could really serve in this capacity to be able to keep people involved. And as the opening became available for member engagement, I approached the board and applied and interviewed and kind of went through that process. But some of the efforts that I'm looking to lead is really to just bridge any gaps that we have across the board. Because I kind of always think back to myself as I approached Glamazon, wanting to be involved, but then kind of just feeling a little bit like I was maybe on the sidelines with not being really totally involved and helping other people in the organization just, bridge those gaps in communication. Whether you're working in a fulfillment center or whether you're at the corporate office, you should have a place and be able to be actively involved. So from a member engagement perspective, those are really the things that I'd like to lead as the effort. We're also planning our all members hands-on meeting, which is kind of going to take place globally. And so we're also looking to accomplish this to not only just kind of tap into kind of the Americas and the popular thing, but what is really happening across the globe that is going to be that will resonate to other LGBTQ plus people that maybe are experiencing challenges or looking for other diversity and with revolving around their environments as well.
Great. I love that, being inclusive of all the way from fulfillment to corporate office. That's great.
Absolutely.
Nicole, you bring a slightly different perspective to this panel. In your role as a DEI consultant, how do you help companies navigate ERG conversations, and how will they relate to DEI initiatives and overall culture? I think Cody said something is not just doing it for the sake of doing it and checking a box. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, just so y'all know, I'm going to agree with everything Cody says anyway, so that will be a reoccurring theme. But really, what I do when I am speaking to companies and they believe that they're ready for the next step in building out ERGs is first step is making sure they know what an ERG is and isn't. That it is not a book club. It is not just a place where you should be throwing social events. You shouldn't be checking boxes. That they have a true understanding that this is a way for the company to truly invest back into their talent. And making sure we have that baseline before we move forward. And if we are on the same page and they understand that this is going to be something that should be integrated into the fabric of the company, then moving forward and breaking down, do you have DEI initiatives? What are those? How do the ERGs fit into there? A lot of companies that, we do verticals or pillars. The ERGs could truly be their own pillar within that larger DEI strategy that they have. And then are they ready for ERGs? Like, what is the culture there? Have they done cultural audits? Is leadership willing and able to be mentors, advisors to the people who are leading these ERGs, and understanding that there's a true structure that needs to be set up? What are those milestones? How are we getting there? What are the metrics that we'll be putting in place to make sure that these are sustainable and impactful before we dive in? And hopefully their overall culture is ready for at least one or two ERGs, and depending on where they're at or what their demographics look like, where should we start? If you only have two parents, it's not going to make sense to do a parents and caregiver ERG. If you're majority women, you may not need to start with a women's ERG if that culture is already there that supports that demographic. So really taking a step back and making sure that your needs are being met and you're not thinking every company's ERGs are going to be the same.
Definitely. And you mentioned a very great point, is that you can't start something if if the culture is not there and if it's not starting at the top. Those are definitely key pieces to starting with that. So we're going to take it to our next question, which is, what lessons have you learned in your experiences with ERGs, i.e. starting an ERG from scratch, expanding, etc.? I'm going to start with Cody because a little birdie told me that you did something called the Builder's Box, which I think we're all really curious to hear more about.
I can definitely talk about that, and I will also shout out Nicole is actually one of the co-founders in that process. Her and I are partners in crime outside of this, so I will also always agree with what she says. But I think starting ERGs really is about finding your why, and it's understanding why you're doing something. Why are you creating programming? Why are you creating connection? Why are you taking time out of your day, usually as a secondary position, to invest into something? And I think once you understand your why, then anything and everything else kind of flows from that. The Builder's Box was something we kind of came to with the actual Austin LGBT Chamber. I approached and said, we've been doing ERGs. I just started my second one. I really want to try to make this obtainable for leaders, because I think trying to not reinvent the wheel is where we all win. I think giving a foundation, we basically built a product and kind of a consultancy to where agencies and companies come to us and we help them start and foundationally create the baseline for their ERGs and their programming, and then they can adapt that to whatever it may be. So kind of what Nicole was talking about is, you know, if it's LGBTQIA+, or if it's women, or we don't really use the term POC at our agency. We do empowered people, inclusive cultures, so we call it EPIC. But I think it's kind of taking a model and being able to shift it, because in this day and age, working smarter and not harder is the key. And I think the rising tide lifts all boats, which is something that we live by, especially in the work that we do. If we can help someone create connection and human connection in their agency or their company, that's really where we all win. Because when we align with someone and we build relationships, we're going to do better work. And when we also don't ask people to remove part of themselves and really authentically show up, that's when companies really win all around.
Great. I loved that epic. Can you go ahead and drop that in the chat? And
Yeah,
that
sure.
is just amazing. That's awesome. Michael, what about you? You've started some ERGs. Tell us a little bit more about your experience in there.
So I'll talk about the ending piece. So getting started is a big hurdle in itself, right? And so we, you know, at HEB, we have we own a lot of parts of the business. So we have manufacturing, we have warehouse, we have transportation, we have the digital side. And so how do we let all the employees know all across the organization that, you know, we have an employee resource group? This is something that is open to them. And so launching in 2020, that has definitely been hard. You know, we weren't able to meet up in groups. So we've been utilizing Slack in a different way. And so to create that space for employees to know, but even then it has proven to, you know, to be an obstacle. So we're working through that. What we have learned through experience and what we've seen. So we are a name tag culture. We wear our name tags with our names. And so learning that, you know, that if we were to put something as simple as, you know, what we call ourselves Pride, the Pride resource group. So putting Pride with a lanyard on there as something as simple in our name tag has started the conversation or sparked the conversation with employees. No matter whether you're walking a warehouse, walking a transportation, or you're in a store on the operations side, you know, it starts the conversation. What is that? How can I join? And so we have seen that has been a proven way to get, you know, people to come in to join, or what, you know, first of all, learn about what it is, but also join. And so we don't just have a Pride resource group. We also have a women's group that started at the same time. We have the black group that started at the same time. We have a Hispanic group that started at the same time. And so that has really proven to be a challenge for all of us, you know, when we start to get the word out there. And so I think something as simple as a t-shirt lanyard really starts the conversation no matter where you are in the business. And then we can guide the employee to where it is that is. And that's for the established employees. What we've learned, what we started with a lot of our new hires, is letting them know from the start on their onboarding that this is something that is open to them, that they can access and opt into. So that is something that we've learned, but the hurdle right now is with the established workforce.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing on that. So I want to go back to something, Nicole, you mentioned. In order to have the culture, and you have to have buy-in already. Can you tell me a little bit about how creating an ERG catalyzes inclusive change within a company?
Of course. If I do that, just echoing what Michael just said, making this part of your onboarding will change everything. It is truly a key piece for anyone out there who's wondering about that. But yeah, with the catalyzing inclusive change within a company, an ERG allows for a few things to happen. It allows someone to know that they're not alone. Like, I may be on the marketing team and no one looks like me. Therefore, I think no one at the company can relate to me and my lived experiences. But if there is an ERG, a Black ERG, a women ERG, that sense of community is there. And I can come in and say, okay, maybe my specific team doesn't look like me or understand some of the things that I go through. But now I have an internal community that really resonates with the things that matter to me. And once you have a sense of belonging in a company, that's in of itself the definition of an inclusive culture. I believe like I belong here. I believe I can bring more than a shell of myself. I don't know if we can ever bring our whole selves at work. That's just my opinion. I don't think they want to see my Instagram stories, but they can if they want to. But, you know, it does allow you to feel like you belong. You want to be there. You want to invest back into the company. You want to help with programming. And that is truly how you catalyze, you know, towards that inclusive community. And also another thing that ERGs allows is it allows the company to see their blind spots. If they enable these groups to give recommendations and let them know these are some of the challenges that we're facing. When I was at General Assembly, one of the really great initiatives that we ran, we had the Parent and Caregivers ERG, realized that our Slack culture wasn't really conducive to their home life balance. We were sort of we're expecting answers and all these things so quickly. They're juggling toddlers, the pandemic, their lives. So we actually went through Slack and found out that you can enable a scheduling tool. And this all came from the parent ERG. And they rolled this up to HR. We looked into it. And before you know it, we were able to bring a new tool to the company that benefited everyone, but it was identified by a specific group because they were more impacted by that specific culture of our Slack use. So that's sort of the ways that like an ERG can help you really get an inclusive culture overall and help everyone feel like I belong here, I'm supported here, and my needs are being met.
I absolutely love that. That is awesome. Especially, I don't call it working from home. I call it living at work. And so when you can be contacted at any time of the day, you definitely want to make sure that there's boundaries. And I think that's an amazing use of an ERG right there. Cody, let's hear from you.
Everything Nicole said, +1, +2, all of it.
+1.
Yeah, and I think it's a yes and. So I believe really what Nicole was hitting on is when you allow someone to thrive, or to belong, you allow them to thrive, and through thriving comes kind of that accountability. And I think ERGs really are accountability for companies. When you look at things like policy, how does this interact with your queer individuals? How does it interact with your people of color? Like when it breaks down, you can actually use it as a vehicle, especially from an HR vein, is like you sit down with people and say, okay, how does this interact with you? Do our policies actually fit you? Are these policies inclusive? And if they're not, how do we change them? And I think ERGs really are an accountable state to not only impact change, but it kind of catalyzes that change because it's disrupting it. For so long, people just kind of go through their workday, but when you have these groups of people that are centralized around an identity, you understand how this business unit affects your identity and if it's positive or negative. And it allows that group then to take a step back and say, there's a lot of great stuff here, but there's actually some stuff that we need to change and it's going to make us better. And through that process, it's accountability because we all live with bias. It's something that's baked into kind of what we do and how we work, but these groups help you kind of step back. They help you get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and they help you kind of push forward to change. And it also catalyzes conversations for change. It's a safe place to kind of say, especially we take BLM last year. There was a lot of people needed to do education for themselves and not ask their Black coworker, what do I need to do? It's like, you gotta take your step first, but then being able to have a safe space to say, I'm dealing with this in my family. Like there's a continuation of just allowing people to show up as humans. And I think that is that catalyst of change that ERGs provide and they push for daily.
That's great. Thank you. Mike, anything you wanna add in terms of your ERGs creating? No? All right. I'll take the silence as a pass.
They're very thorough.
I would definitely not want to follow Nicole. But let's go to our next question and ask, how are ERGs drivers for DEI work? Vincent, how about we start off with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the perspective of that, diversity is so multidimensional, right? I can be LGBTQ plus, have been in the military, have a disability, and be Latino, right? And so I fall into potentially all these groups, and having that diversity and the ability to still feel included in an environment where, let's just say in years past, there wasn't ERGs or affinity groups that allowed for people to be represented in the company. I think for DEI work, it's definitely important to have that representation to allow people to be able to feel included, kind of whatever group that they decide to, or they feel affiliated to, and to be able to, continue to drive that equity along with it as well. So I think a lot of that comes down to one, having the visibility is really important. Not only from just like from recruiting to retention is also the big thing, is people feeling a sense of belongingness. And I think Nicole, Cody, and Michael all kind of have touched upon that. So I think that's a really big proponent of how ERGs can continue to drive that DEI message.
Great, thank you. Nicole, how about you?
Yes to everything Vincent said, and even looking at a different scope with ERGs, and this is an opt-in. I do want to preface it this: you should not go to your ERGs as a tool for your recruiting. This is an ask, and if they agree, then yes. But ERGs could be a really great way to source diverse talent. If you are always looking in the same places and you find that you're getting the same kind of people joining the team, going to your ERG and being very transparent, like, these are where we're at and these are the areas that we're trying to work on, and we would love to pull from your networks and make sure that we're not just always going down the same path, is an amazing way to help your DEI initiatives of diversifying your workplace. So they're a great tool for that. And then, it really is the retention, the sense of belonging. Are you also trying to make sure that there's professional development for marginalized people within your community? Working with your ERGs could be a really great way of figuring out what are those needs that people have, or where do they feel like they're not being invested in? Do they feel like they don't have equal opportunities for promotions? Do they feel as though their work is looked at a different scope? If you can tap into that ERG, oftentimes we say people want a seat at the table. I see ERGs as them building their own table. And now you're going to their table and asking for a seat and asking to hear them. And I like it that way much better. Like, not everyone wants to sit with you. So maybe you should walk across the cafeteria and you should ask them, how was lunch today? Instead of making them come to you every single time saying, we don't want mac and cheese anymore. But I live by analogy, so y'all are going to hear a lot of stuff like that come out of my mouth. Sorry.
That's awesome. No, one, I love your first point to ask. If we say yes, then yes. And then two, of course, your cafeteria, not only because it's dinner and I'm hungry, but because we don't want to sit at your table. We want to sit at our own table and you can come join us. That is, if there's a snap thing in here, I'm not seeing a snap, but I would give you snaps on that one. Michael or Cody, anything you want to add to that? All right.
I did add one thing I just wanted to add on to it as well. Just at least within Amazon, we have a very a culture of what we call like working backwards, and we're customer obsessed. And so a lot of what for our DEI efforts is to reflect what our customers look like, and it's very diverse. And so having a workforce that also represents that really helps to kind of move that message forward for DE&I as well.
Awesome. Yes, definitely want to look like the communities we serve. All right. So for the next question, I would love to hear from all of you on this one. If you have all started or worked with ERGs, how can we manage up and encourage senior leadership to allow ERGs to form and operate within our companies? So I'll go ahead and start off with Michael.
So I think we've all touched a little bit on this. So I think it's important to close the gap for a lot of senior leaders as far as what is important to an employee. And so I think Vincent, you mentioned earlier that that was something that you were looking for in your employment. And so what we've learned and through some of our meetings was that as we've gotten new hires, that has been something that has been important to them. And so we know in today's world, in the world that we're living in, that talent is an obstacle for a lot of us. And so understanding that the workforce is looking for, that's important to them. Some of them prioritize that as number one. And so closing that gap with senior leadership, letting them know that this is important to your current workforce, and so this is how you're going to get talent. We've gotten talent just based on the fact that we know that we celebrate and we have the diverse group of ERGs available to employees. So I think that explanation it really does help.
Awesome, thank you. Cody, how about you?
I agree exactly with Michael. I think when you look at where we are today, and especially not post-pandemic, because we're still kind of going through it, but I think we have the option to choose what we show up to every day. And if your workplace isn't what you want, there are a myriad of options that are competing because their culture is so good and it is so progressive. And I think you look at people like Google and Salesforce, I hear all the time that they fight each other for candidates because it's where you fit as a person, not where you fit as a job description. And when that is what your culture is, that's so important to then expand out, because it is us competing with each other to create families and homes for people. And I think the ERGs really push that culture of they're in the onboarding, they're in every aspect, they're in the DNA of your company. And it's kind of how you will look at talent going forward. Is it's great that you pay this much, but like, what is my life balance going to be like? And do I get to show up every day?
Yeah, and I think that's even more important now that we're in a work from home culture, where you're trying to find those ways to stay included when you don't see someone every day or not in an office sharing stories and feeling like you belong. That's really great. Thank you. Vincent.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of talked a lot about recruiting, and I think one of the notable things that I at least feel that's come out of the affinity groups and working with DE&I is that we started doing what they call like candid chats, which allows that anyone that is who is going through the interview process can connect with an affinity group of their choice and talk to somebody what kind of like what the company culture is like, and to learn more information about what it's like to not only just work for Amazon, but what is it like to be actually part of these affinity groups. So we really try to set the precedent very, very early on during that process to expose candidates to, what it would be like to collaborate with the affinity groups as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but not least, Nicole.
Yes, I think that the question was, how can you encourage leadership to allow ERGs to form? I say don't, just do. They'll be fine. I'm joking. I'm joking. You do need their buy-in, but for a lot of this is already said and done. We have the data to prove why diversity matters. We all know this, but if you are in that place, you do need a business case for a lot of times. Whether we want to admit it or not, most of us work for for-profit companies. Return on investment, the bottom line, that's everyone's main thought. And when I was starting the ERGs at GA, I actually started with the women's group, but no one really wanted it to happen. But I'm like, I'm going to do it anyway. And I did surveys. I just started doing things myself and getting the buy-in from different people and money here and there where I could find it. And after doing that for about 3 months, I was actually able to come back to leadership with hard numbers and said, this is what I did. This is how happy it made people. This is the feedback. And now there is actually a hunger for it. So if you are trying to figure out how I can get someone to allow me to do it, sometimes you do have to bring data to the table. Plenty of case studies you can bring out there, plenty of things that you could do on your own, but really just building that case and letting them understand why it's important to them. And like everyone else has just said on this call, when I talk to my friends or people I mentor and they're looking at a new job, I tell them to ask these DEI questions back. When it's like, do you have any questions for me? Yes, I do. What's your board look like? Do you have ERGs? What are your DEI initiatives? At this point, we're interviewing companies. It is no longer them trying to decide if they want us. That day's over. Everyone needs people. If you're top talent, you should know that, and you should only want to work in a place that is truly aligned to what your values are. So I tell people, ask those hard questions, and now companies are realizing they're being interviewed. So leverage that.
Definitely. That is a phenomenal answer right there. And I think that's a very important piece too. The more we hear it asked, the more it encourages people to actually move forward. Thank you so much, Nicole. All right, for the group, the next question I'm going to ask is, what are some of your recommendations on monitoring and proving the effectiveness of ERGs? Nicole, you mentioned that you were able to come back with hard facts and hard numbers on your women's resource group. So I'm curious, tell me a little bit more about how you monitored and showed success with your ERG.
I love surveys. A good NPS is what I live by, because it just takes out, like Cody said, we all have bias. Like, of course, I'm going to want a women's group or a Black group. Like, they're like, well, you seem a little skewed about why you want these things. But if you could take that out and really just show, I surveyed people, and 100 people at this company actually answered it, and they directly told us what their needs are and the ways in which we can serve those needs. I did it on a small scale, surveyed again, And this is the impact that they showed. This is how happy they were. This is how you can ask, how more engaged do you feel at work? Do you feel like you belong? And you can compare where you start and where you end if you're constantly doing surveys and trying to get feedback, and making sure that you're serving the need and not what you think people want as well. And I'm a big project management person. So what are your milestones? Are you looking to grow the ERG? What does that look like? Are you retaining people in the ERG? And you just should always have some form of measurement, all different types out there, but just have that in place. So you do understand that I'm doing the right thing, I'm serving the right need, and there is a reason why we're investing in this, either time or money from a business perspective.
Sounds like with your surveys, you're also doing a lot of program evaluation and continuous improvement.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Build, measure, learn. Always do that. Just over and over and over.
Awesome. All right. Michael, how about you?
So Nicole's right. You definitely do need data, and so we continue to see that, and we can do that through Slack as we continue to see members grow, and we're able to report back, how many members have we had, and listen into what it is that the conversations that they're going on through the Slack channels, and so that really helps us and show, and the channel is open to people, right? And so if we wanted, we can see what kind of engagement is going, how this has grown from one month to the other. And so I think that for me is a way to gauge, how our group is growing, and that'd be, I guess, a factor in as what I would, share with the group that was needed. So before our group started, we were a strong 6, and so we had people coming, and we would meet up in Houston, and so this was all volunteer time. And so, this is something we weren't getting paid for, so we just did it, right? And so we had people from Temple, I was from Austin. We had some people from San Antonio that would drive all the way to Houston to meet up in group. And so that group ended up getting bigger and bigger. And so we would share that with the organization, say, look, these are people that are volunteering their time, that have a shared interest, that this is important to them from all parts of the business, that are meeting up in Houston, right? And this is what they're gathering to do. And this is and at the time we were planning to do events together, and I'm not talking about mixers. I think that's always the first thing people assume, right? But we're talking about organizing to what kind of LGBT nonprofits exist out there. How can we support that, representing the brand? And so starting that way and seeing that growth, and that was the evolution into what we needed to provide to get our ERG started.
I love that. We should change the name from YPs and ERGs, not just mixers. All right, Cody, how about you?
I definitely think, Michael and Nicole hit it. Data talks, especially to C-suite and C-level people. They want to understand what it is. And I think something that we kind of joke about sometimes, and a phrase we throw around, is demystifying ROI, because ROI can be a really hard thing to track, especially when you're looking at human capital versus like profit and loss and money. But I think one of the big things is that survey piece that Nicole talked about. After every piece of programming we do, we look at things like year-over-year trends, even year-over-year down to the program level of, we did this month. What is it going to look like next quarter? Did we increase engagement? What were our comments? What was the number of comments coming in? And being able to give that data back shows that you can show a progression of, as you do things and over time, you're continuing to grow. One of the things that I keep close to my heart that I was told by a colleague who's been doing ERGs for like 15 years is grow to the size that leadership can't say no. And it kind of hits on what Nicole was talking about. Once you reach critical mass, and there are so many people, they can't say no to it. Because if you're an organization of 1,000 and there's 250, you're at 25% of your organization in your ERG. You can't say no to that. That's a fourth of your body participating in something. So it's showing them that, hey, this is bringing connection. It does bring retention, because when people are engaged in their work, they stay, they don't leave. If they feel like they can show up, that's ROI right there. So I think it's just tracking those metrics and making a case study, and always making sure that your data does speak, so that when someone does ask you, oh, why should I give you $10,000? Well, look at this portfolio of data I have. Look at these trends that I have. This is why you should actually give me $15,000. And then let's talk about next year.
That's awesome. I love that. All right, make them as big until they can't stop you. That's awesome. All right, last but not least, Vincent.
I mean, I think everyone's kind of really touched upon a lot of some really great points. And like anything, I think we've all said that data really speaks to it. I believe with a lot of uh, especially like just kind of monitoring is right the growth, and um, especially one way, at least in our organization with the affinity groups for Glamazon, at least we're all broken into all these different chapters because we have people that are working in fulfillment centers, you might have people working in a corporate office, or you might have people that are on the out in the field. And so kind of creating the different affiliations to be able to kind of continue to drive that. So we really look at kind of like the measurement as how people are willing to just volunteer, but not just sign up, but also show up. And more recently with Austin's Pride Parade, we had a Glamazon representation there, but through COVID and through that time period, a lot of things moving to virtual, you kind of have that kind of disengagement then. So it's like really trying to re-engage people and kind of with you've probably heard the expression, if you know, or seen it from the movie, is like, if you build it, they will come, right? Um, is having an opportunity for people to be involved, and that's really whether it's virtual or in person, and then kind of really measuring that engagement from there. So as always, the data speaks. I think even tying back to your previous question, with senior leadership being involved, and how do you keep them, is also showing back that data and showing that people are craving these type of outlets, and they're looking for opportunities to feel included, and be able to provide that, and show the significance of it. Also, I think it's a really important factor, and especially just showing the effectiveness overall.
That's awesome. And you mentioned in keeping your members engaged, which leads kind of a nice segue into my next question is, it's great to have all this data to prove the success and the need for your ERGs, but how do you keep your ERG members engaged, especially as we're working through COVID in a virtual environment? Who wants to kick us off? I will start with Cody.
I think that if anything, I feel like we're more engaged or in a virtual setting. I think it's easier to get connected with someone because you're removing the boundaries of, well, especially like at a national level. I think of like our agency is similar to like Amazon. You've got multiple offices everywhere. So I think when you look at the connection of someone, it's easier to connect with people. It's also been easier to tell stories through the virtual format. I just wrapped a virtual Pride Summit that had 1,200 attendees spread across multiple brands and multiple clients. And it was really around, how have we showed up as storytellers and queer individuals in the workplace and in our lives. But I think it is the analogy, if you build it, they will come. I empower all of my teams across our ERGs and across agencies is, if there's something you want to do that's specific to your identity, like, I'm going to empower you. I'm going to build a platform. I'm going to make sure you have the tools, and that we're going to make sure you're successful to tell your story and bring it in. And I think empowering people to do things will always return in something. I feel like I'm talking around that, but I think virtual has kind of been a blessing. People want connection past just a happy hour, past just a drink. And I think the ERG is allowing people to expand on their stories and getting to know you monthly or whatever it may be, has really engaged at least our culture at our agency to say, hey, I want to know you more than just the 5 or 10 minutes we have in a meeting. Like, I want to have coffee chats with you. I want to know your family. So it really starts spurring things.
That's awesome. No, I love that. Thank you so much, Cody. Nicole.
Yes, so everything Cody said, I do think the virtual environment helped, especially, in Austin, parking downtown is a nightmare. And that used to keep me not wanting to go to things like real life. I'm like, do I really want to deal with that? And I think a lot of times we don't realize that, again, people could have children at home. They could really want to go, but they're like, what about childcare? Can I afford the $20 of parking? When you remove those barriers, I think the virtual landscape helped a lot with accessibility. And then just keeping people engaged, it is asking them what they want and then making sure they have a way of doing that. We did a lot of really great programs at GA that were off the cuff. We had one of my favorite events was for Women's History Month, where we had women submit anonymous stories, whatever they wanted to share. And then when we presented it, we actually had male volunteers from work tell those stories in that voice. People cried. It was like the greatest event ever. That people like, I would never think about having this at work. and being so vulnerable. And so to keep people engaged is like listen to them, allow other people to tell you ideas. Like you should have an ERG leadership team, but they should not be the only one steering the ship. Like that's not how this should work. They should be there to do some of the legwork and emails and track who's coming and going. But it should be an open door where anyone can come in and be like, this is an idea I have, or this is something I'm looking for. And as Cody said, help them build that, make them feel empowered to tell that story or hold that event. And you really will keep people engaged. And I think also understanding when to stop. We went through a period of feeding everyone with as many programs and ideas as we could think of. And I mean, I got to the point where I was like, I'm about to start muting channels and I'm running it. Like, so also knowing that balance, knowing when to take your foot off the gas a little bit, let people breathe and actually soak in what you're doing. Sometimes less is more. So making sure what you're doing is actually intentional and impactful.
That is amazing. I love that. I got goosebumps when you talked about that, what you guys did. That was amazing. Stealing that idea. All right, Michael, how about you?
So we have 3 different generations in our workforce, right? So everyone's on a different digital journey. And yes, although Zoom and Slack have been ways to connect virtually, it has been an obstacle for some, right? And so how do we go back and we educate how to use these functions and learn, and that has been a big component of, really taking the basics to how do we add someone at Slack, and how can we use these tools to be effective? How do we use breakout rooms? And so learning through that, we've had about 3 meetings now, and we're doing them quarterly. I think we need them a lot more. And that has been the feedback from a lot of the employees. They would like to have them a lot more. But as our groups tend to get bigger, we have a lot to share, and so we can have good. We start off with some pre-work prior to the meetings with about 5 questions prior, so to make sure that employees are already thinking about what they want to share, what they want to contribute. And this past meeting, we barely got past 1 question, right? So the conversation was so good. And so, but I can't imagine that, doing that with, 30, 40 people in a virtual space. So really learning, what's the right amount of people to have good conversations in these breakout rooms. And so we're learning through all of that, but the engagement is definitely there. So we know what we're doing right. I think in the future, as we come out of the pandemic, an option that I would like to propose to the group is create an in-person setting meeting, but also leaving that meeting in a conference room where people that want to opt in to join virtually do have so, and they can contribute to the meetings.
Definitely. Giving that option of the hybrid model, I think, is really helpful, especially for those people like me who love in-person stuff more. I'm willing to pay for that $20 parking, Nicole. All right, last but not least, Vincent.
Yeah, I think you definitely touched on what I was going to mention is definitely like moving into a hybrid model, because I know with virtual fatigue happens, right? We are on meetings and calls all day, and it's like the last thing you want to do is be on another one. So yeah, I think it's just trying to be creative, right? Where the space allows it. And I know at least for as I was planning for Austin Pride, and we had all these members engaged, and it was getting really exciting, and it was kind of hit this moment of disappointment where it just felt like a tire just got deflated, because you're building up to this moment, and then all of a sudden it just kind of gets pulled away, right? All understanding with health concerns, and but it's being able to kind of also pivot and know that you have that engagement. What can you do now? So it's being creative and creating just different type of virtual events, whether it's just special interest for your type of ERG, whatever the focus is. In our case, it's LGBTQ+, so we might have virtual events regarding things that are coming up like Trans Awareness Day, or events relating to National Coming Out Day, something along those lines. Is really just trying to navigate the calendar and figure out where you really can kind of tap into. I apologize, my vacuum is going off on the side. Give me 1 second.
I'm sure you ordered it on Amazon too.
I did, and it's let me stop it. It's gonna get kind of loud. Sorry, 1 second.
No worries. We'll move into our final question before we go to the questions and answers. Again, if you have questions for our panelists, please be sure to drop them in the Q&A tool. But we'll go ahead and wind it down with our final question. And I'm going to ask that each of you leave our audience with your top ERG tip and how to ignite an inclusive workplace, whether it has to do with starting an ERG, reinvigorating or expanding one, or how ERGs can impact a company's D&I initiatives. Really, what is the driving factor that you want to leave with to our audience today? I will go ahead and start with Michael. Uh-oh. Okay.
So I'll talk about how it's definitely impacted our company's DEI initiatives. And so two things. For one, through the conversation with the groups, with ours in particular being the LGBT, we have really looked at, I guess, how do I put it simplest? So now when an employee gets hired, they can opt in to share, omit their birth name if they'd like. And so that was something that was shared with us through someone who was trans in our group, who identified as trans. And so that was something that was looked at because of the conversations that were had openly within these meetings. So never, not once did we ever think, we would hire, trans employees that shared, they would be addressed by their birth name. And so that was difficult, and we've heard the feedback. But again, through these conversations and through these meetings, we have learned a lot. And so now that as something else that we have opened up with employees is allowing them to share their pronouns through their name. And so when anywhere I register, whether it's through through Slack or through my company profile, it does share my pronouns. And so that has been an option that has been opted into all of our employees. And lastly, through all of the ERGs, our company has launched, and you may have seen it, but we call it the Be the Change Initiative. And so in that, we highlight suppliers, right, from Black-owned businesses during Black History Month, during Women's Appreciation Month. We highlight women suppliers, women-owned businesses, and those are put on display and really focused in educating the customer through what it is, exactly we have. And this was, again, from conversations that have started through these groups that we figured out that not only was important to our employees, but it was also important to our customers to see.
I love that, especially highlighting the minority-owned businesses and really calling them out. That's amazing. All right, Cody, how about you?
I think the one tip that I always try to give people, especially if they're starting an ERG or kind of just doing the work, is have grace with yourself. Have grace with those around you, your leadership. I think when we look at journeys, everybody is on their own respective journey with DEI. I think as ERGs start to peel away at the onion and things come out, not everyone's going to be on the same page, and that's okay. I think respecting people's journey and empowering their journey is part of that game, but it's having grace to understand that people are sometimes going to say the wrong thing, and they may not mean it. An example with Michael, like, someone may misuse a pronoun, but they can get it right. You have to have grace with them in that moment. If you jump to conclusions or kind of jump the gun, it really defeats the whole work of DEI and kind of getting dirty with each other, of creating safe space. So really, grace in all things. Like, let people show up when they do show up. Thank them for showing up. Thank them for creating space, but just have grace.
I love that. Creating grace and allowing mistakes, but allowing opportunity to learn. That's great. Vincent.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely in terms of just making sure that at least that that other employees understand kind of like the scope of what the ERGs are, and how it really fits into the workplace. Even though we are Glamazon and LGBTQ plus, doesn't mean that you can't be an ally and be part of that ERG, or you may be part of the BIN, which is our Black Employee Network. You can be part of that and listen to the conversations and be very still included, and creating those opportunities to learn and to really be involved and to volunteer wherever you want to be involved at. I think that's probably a really important tip. And then just yeah, I think, yeah, I'll just kind of leave it there. So yeah, really just kind of understanding that these ERGs exist to support the employees that are there and to continue to make people feel included and show the diversity and everything.
Awesome. All right, Nicole, bring us home. What's your hot tip?
Hot tip: if you're thinking about starting an ERG, do it. Do it. If you have the thought, do it. Everything everyone else said is really important as well. I'm going to start with what Cody said: having grace, especially if you're starting. Be kind to yourself. it is it's a lot of hard work, but it's so rewarding, and it's work that needs to be done. Don't feel bad if you don't feel like you got it right the first time or the second time. It took a lot of iterations. And, I launched 7 ERGs during the pandemic globally, and it was a lot of restarting. There was a lot of things that we learned along the way. Um, and then have a plan so that you don't feel like you're getting lost. A blueprint. That's when the builder's box, get something like that. It doesn't have to be the builder's box, but like if you can get a blueprint, it will save you a lot of headaches, and it'll just give you a way to sort of map out where you want to go, who you want to serve, and some of those things where you don't have to reinvent the wheel yourself. Like lean on a network of people. This is a great network of people to do. Don't go alone. You go further as a group. Another tip. I'm like, they're all coming to me as I'm thinking about this. I'm like, I got tips all day, but really just do the work, lean on people who've done it, ask those questions, and truly and honestly, like ERGs can change companies, from parental leave to the kinds of holidays and days that we should be recognizing that sometimes companies don't realize are really important. Like when you make the space for those voices, like it will truly change the culture at the company. So if you are someone thinking about creating that space, just do it. You will be serving so many people.
Awesome. That's a great way to end our panel questions. So thank you guys for participating. And we have some time, and I want to go over to our Q&A. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the tool. But first question I have, and I'll look for hands from our panelists of who wants to take a question. In your opinion, what is the minimum number of employees in an org for an ERG to be effective? What, if any, considerations need to be in place for smaller organizations? Do I see? Oh, Michael, are you going for it?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. I would say, and in my opinion, we wouldn't limit the amount. And so what we have done is we created 2 channels, right? And so we have one in that a channel where all employees across the organization can open and share. This is via Slack. And then we have one channel that is specific just to Central Texas. So that kind of gives you more of that central message, what it is we're doing here in Austin, how can we gather here in Austin. But it's also nice to see that that global channel where we can see what is NWT doing, what is corporate admin doing, what is the digital team doing, and then that allows for the networking to happen. But then again, we can still bring it back home through focusing through the Central Texas channel. So I would say no limit, but there are some helpful ways to keep it regional.
Awesome.
I don't know if there's a minimum number, but if you only have 20 employees, like go back to what Cody said, what's the why? So if there's 20 of you, do you need ERGs, or can you really just figure out what the individual, like how to meet people where they're at? That might be the different question. Like if I created this ERG, would it really just be Sally and Bob sitting alone because they're the only 2 Black employees? And you may be actually excluding them instead of making them feel included. So just make sure that the number of people who would be in this ERG aren't going to be feeling like they are being othered or ostracized, because it may have an opposite impact. In my opinion, 50 to 100 employees, that's a good starting point, where you may have some people who are from marginalized communities who could benefit from that additional space and additional investment. But I wouldn't say there's a hard minimum number. Just be careful not to make people feel weird.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'll build on what Nicole said. I think you don't want to be exclusionary. I think when you get to smaller spaces, you can be, because it doesn't support. But I think if you also come to a place where you are 50 to 100 and you can't do multiple ERGs, there's nothing wrong with a central inclusive group. I've seen some agencies that actually do better programming and better just work overall when it's a single group doing it, because you're cross learning about every culture at the same time. And you have the opportunity then to have different lenses and different, say, watch outs that you may have not had with the other people in the room when you're just focusing on a silo. So I think if you are smaller, start with something that is central, that's programming and building, and then try to expand.
Definitely. All right. The last question we have is, how have you dealt with obtaining the funding to activities ERGs want to do. We have so many tasks or so many asks and not enough funding. I know that's depending on if you're coming from a large organization, a small organization, if you're still wanting to start an ERG, how do you deal with funding?
I'll take this one because I had to do this. I went for no funds to actually a dedicated budget by the end of it. If you have a lot of asks, again, going to survey you to death, prioritize them. Like what are the main needs? You won't be able to do everything unless you are at a really big company that's got a really big budget. And even then, you're probably going to still have one thing that one or two people wanted that you're just like, we're not going to do that. So prioritize what is being asked for and go after what's going to have the most impact. That's a really great way of doing that. And then obtaining the funding. You got to prove why you get the money. I'm going to be honest. You have to say why you need that money and what that return's going to be. So the way I did it, Women's History Month, I convinced someone in HR to give me $1,500. It was about building personal relationships. I didn't know this person. I just sort of kept at it, kept talking about things, and was like, okay, Women's History Month is coming up. We say that DEI is now on our roadmap and it's important. I found a speaker who will come in. They're giving us a discount and they're going to run 3 workshops for the women at the company. And I just sort of broke it down. And like for $1,500, we're going to be able to do this much. I've had the data, people saying these are the things that they want. Let's do it. Let's do an exit survey afterwards. How did that help with things? So if you are asking for money, you do need to be ready to justify what that money is needed for, how you're going to use it, and how you're going to show that it was a good investment.
I love that. Thank you, Nicole. Anyone else want to take a stab at that question? All right, well then, seeing no one, I think Nicole answered it perfectly. I do want to thank you guys for those great questions, and thank you to our panelists. Cody, Michael, Nicole, Vincent, you were all wonderful. I know even me personally, just sitting here, I've learned so much, and so I'm really grateful for the time you guys took to share your expertise. Again, for our attendees, it is now time for some networking, where you can also meet some of our panelists and have some more one-on-one conversations. So once we end the presentation mode, you'll be able to move from table to table. You'll be able to do that by simply double-clicking on the table you'd like to move to. And then you're able to turn on your camera and mic using the buttons you'll see on the bottom of your screen. Each table will work like a Zoom breakout room where you can see and hear only the people sitting at your table, and then you're able to move from table to table as you start networking. So the platform, we're going to open it up right now, and it'll be for roundtable discussions until 7 p.m. And I want to thank you all again for joining us tonight for YPs and ERGs, Igniting an Inclusive Workplace panel discussion brought to you by Austin Young Chamber and Austin LGBT Chamber. So thank you all. Thank you to our speakers, and we'll see you at the tables.